Jodie, lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
Tell the audience, if they don't know you, and I'd be surprised, but if they don't know you and they've been living on the moon for the last 3 or 4 years, a little bit about your backstory, what you stand for, what you do at work, and how we came to be sitting here today.
So I'm Jodie Hill, I'm the founder of Thrive Law, and if we go back 8 years, I have what I now call my mental breakthrough, but was very much a mental breakdown, and unfortunately was forced to leave the workplace because the environment wasn't right, the support wasn't there, and quite frankly, I just didn't feel psychologically safe. And I almost left the legal profession, but actually, in a moment of madness, decided to launch my own law firm to really create a firm that puts people first, but also, because I practice employment law, being able to, I suppose, link the legal and the psychological safety and the HR piece all into one, but really putting well-being and mental health at the top of the agenda, not an afterthought. And when I looked for firms to go and work for, I couldn't really see that. I kept going for interviews and you have that gut feeling that it's just not quite right, I'm not going to fit here. I suppose to give a bit of context, I'm also neurodivergent, which I didn't know at the time. So I've kind of been on this journey of very much self-discovery, whilst also launching and running my own law firm on my own,
Successfully, yep.
Which has been a real journey. Oh, and COVID in the middle of all that. So it's been an amazing journey, but I feel like I've learned so much about myself throughout that journey. But part of it was also then realising that I didn't know how I came across to people, partly because I wasn't a diagnosed neurodivergent person then, so I didn't know, I suppose I didn't have the self-awareness for myself, but equally I didn't know as a leader how I was coming across. So over time, it's for me, it's been about, one, understanding myself better so that I can be a better leader, but two, transferring some of those skills to the team so that they can really use that, one, with their clients, but two, with each other, and actually trying to really understand each other so that we can be psychologically safe together, so that I'm actually really vulnerable with them and they're vulnerable with me. And that's a challenge, but it's doable.
So when you talk about being vulnerable, is that a prerequisite to saying whether or not you're psychologically safe? So if you can be vulnerable, does that say psychological safety exists, or is there another way of defining it? I
think it does to a degree. I think there are layers to psychological safety, and one area is actually people feeling vulnerable, or that they can be vulnerable without judgment. So one part of it is actually being vulnerable. It's then how others react, or the fear of how others might react. And I also think it goes beyond that, and it's thinking about, well, actually, I might not be being vulnerable, but I want to challenge something. So it's not necessarily vulnerability, but can I ask questions without fear? Can I challenge without fear? And do I feel like I belong? So there's a whole raft of layers to psychological safety. So I don't think that there's just one thing that we can just say, oh, tick this box, now we have psychological safety because you once told me that you had a breakdown. Obviously that's the cornerstone for me in terms of building the psychological safety, but it's all the other little consistent things that actually help me maintain that, because you can lose it very quickly.
Yeah. Can you think of an example where you've either witnessed it, and I'm not talking about a client example, because in your category area, you're obviously going to meet clients all the time that bond has been broken in some way. But can you think of something where you've physically witnessed it and either had to take remedial action or take a lesson from it effectively?
So where there's a super toxic person and people in your team have the courage to tell you and you do nothing, you are going to damage psychological safety beyond belief, because they will not trust that you'll ever deal with anything if you're not able to support them because it's hard to raise issues about things in the workplace, particularly if that person that they're complaining about is a high performer or they're senior, because there's almost this protective bubble that they have around them, and it doesn't matter what they do, they're protected. And we see it a lot in law firms. It's the high billers. It's like, oh, they don't need to do all this other stuff because they make a lot of money. But for me, if you don't act on that, or you act and it's a complete hash, and you don't support those individuals through that process, and you throw them in the bus and you say, oh, so-and-so in accounts, they said you did this, it massively damages psychological safety, because those people feel as though they can't trust you anymore. And also, they're probably never going to tell you again if something's not going well. And as leaders, we need to know.
So I'm just thinking on that mode, we measure trust, as you know, as one of the aspects of our connection measure at Thomas. And we know that trust is such a key indicator of whether somebody feels psychologically safe. But when you think about that bond of trust where it was broken in those examples, you have a quote that I think goes something along the lines, your culture in an organisation is defined by the worst behaviour you tolerate.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you explain a bit more about what you mean there?
So I suppose it's leaning into that point around maintaining that toxic person in the workplace, or observing discriminatory behaviour and not calling it out, or seeing that people have preferential treatment towards one person because they know each other and they like each other, and somebody else is a bit segregated or excluded. And I think that often it's the subtleties, and it's the things that I think sometimes in the workplace, we're trying to focus on one silver bullet and say, if I just did this one initiative, or I just did this one thing, this is going to make my workplace psychologically safe. But I think we often forget about the behaviours that happen, one, on a day-to-day basis, but two, it's the omissions, it's the things we don't do that can really have a profound effect on someone's ability to trust, but also to feel safe in doing anything else in the workplace. Because once that trust is gone, I think psychological safety is really hard to maintain.
Yeah, with the same in a relationship, actually, outside of the work environment. So if you think about you talk about those sort of almost micro behaviours, but what are the things that an organisation can do to create a culture that is safe? Like, what are the best tips and tools? I mean, you see it when it often has fully broken, because you're in litigation. That's the bit that I know you try and preempt with a lot of the training work that your company does, your organisation does. But what are the things, the tell signs that an organisation's starting to lose that sense of trust, which then will obviously, I would expect, affect the performance of those organisations? So
there's a couple of tells in terms of the data that you can ascertain. So whether it's presenteeism, absenteeism, sickness rates, all of these things, attrition rates, things like that. So think about the data points that you can lean into. But then there's the other side of the data, which is, how do people feel? So one of the things that we are really proud of doing is using that data on a quarterly basis to direct our wellbeing initiatives and support and how we lead, our processes, everything. It's a number of different data points from different sources collated in different ways, so that we're, I suppose, building a data-driven approach, but in a way that's meaningful. Nice. So it's not done once a year and you're just saying, oh, well, you said all these millions of things and now we're going to pick one thing. What we're trying to do is direct our efforts, because we're a small business, and our a lot of people will say, well, if you have a small business, you don't have the resource to build psychological safety because we don't have a HR team, for example. And that's wrong. Psychological safety sits within all of the team, and it's the role we all play. So it's not just me as the leader, it's how people talk to each other, it's how they communicate, and it's how supported they feel. So one of the other ways that we do this is we do monthly feedback, which is anonymous, on every behaviour that we align to our values, and everybody scores everybody.
The whole company scores?
For the whole company, every month.
How long does it take?
It takes you about 10 to 15 minutes.
To do everyone, so it's like less than a minute per person or something. Yeah,
there's a couple of little boxes that you can tick. Yeah. We've just redone it actually on the basis that we've now got a lot more people. It was taking too long, and we wanted it to remain meaningful. So we've reduced it down and merged some of them together and things like that. So we do that every month. But what's really helpful for me is I can see the tells through that feedback. I don't know who said what. And we wanted to keep it anonymous, but
it's anonymous.
It's anonymous.
Definitely unattributably anonymous.
Yes, yeah. So it's anonymous, and I also ask for narratives if you're not scoring someone the expected score, and for me that gives me a really quick pulse on, okay, there's three people independently saying communication's not good with this person, right? We need to deal with it, and that means that they know that it's dealt with if they put it on that form, but also if anyone's having any feedback through that loop, they know it's done in a positive, constructive way.
So they all get their own feedback. It's not gone to the manager and
so they get it through the manager. So what we decided was receiving written feedback can be taken the wrong way, because everybody writes in a different way, and certainly from a neurodivergent perspective, if I receive written feedback, I can completely miss the tone completely, and a lot of people can, and sometimes it requires a skill to deliver that feedback. So we don't just print it off and hand it to them. We sit down and we talk through it, and they score themselves as well. And then if we think the scores are different, we talk through that. So you're spotting things so much sooner than an annual appraisal, if anything comes through. And I think for me, it goes back to the systems that you put in place and the touch points and the space that you create for people to be vulnerable, to give feedback, to challenge, to ask questions, and most importantly, to feel like they belong.
So if you think about that example of all that feedback, it's a lot to take on, as you rightly say. It's quite good to see it filtered in some way. And then it's mirrored against their own self-view. It's quite common that there's a discrepancy there in some areas. We see it often. You'll get people that tend to reduce or score themselves, if you like, in worse ways than the audience does, with a sort of self-effacing. And that kind of visible lens people tend to react in that way. But you get some people who have an inflated view of their skills. What would you do in a scenario where somebody perceives themselves as highly communicative and positive, or whatever the measures are that you have, and yet others have rated them as lower than that? How would you manage that conversation today?
So that is actually something we do a lot of training on, and it's partly because it is a difficult conversation in that you're trying to find the alignment and understand, and first of all, get that person to understand why people might have raised that. So how I would approach it is, first of all, being very evidence-based. So it's not so-and-so said this about you. Yeah. It's how you deliver that message. And you're also delivering it amongst other feedback, right? So getting them to understand that we're not just honing in on this one area. There's all of these other things that have been really, really good. And it's getting them to align on, so why do we think this piece here has dropped? Or if they don't agree it's dropped, it's, well, what's the reason for that? And giving them a space to challenge it and taking that away, because I think, there can sometimes just be personality conflict, and that, just going and saying, well, this is taken as read, this is your score, because they get a score, by the way, and that links to their bonus. So they might want to challenge it, because if they don't hit a certain behaviour score, they don't get a financial bonus. So it's driving the right behaviours.
Have you ever not paid someone a bonus when they've got a low score?
Nobody's ever scored below.
Okay.
So they've had some months where they have, but because it's taken as an average, they've managed to turn it around within 3 months.
So you'd say it works, that kind of visibility and feedback?
Yeah, it does. And it is a bit of a trial, because I'd never used this technique before, and it's just something that we've played around with and just tried to work out, going back to my previous point about the toxic billers, the high billers, you lose the performance from a behavioural perspective when you only focus on financial performance. And so many businesses fall into that trap, and that damages psychological safety, because it basically tells people, as long as you just work ridiculous hours and bill loads of money, we don't care how you behave. And that doesn't help the whole team. It might help drive you in a small area, but it's a short-term win rather than a longer-term one.
Totally agree. We had a manager at Manchester United, the team that I follow, Alex Ferguson, that everybody knows about. And he used to have a rule that if there was just one rotten apple, he would eject them.
You have to do it quickly.
And fast and callously, and the fan base would never understand, why has that amazing player been asked to leave? They're the favourite. But they'd turn, and there'd be a point where that would just ruin the rest of the basket, to continue the metaphor. One of the things we've talked about, so Thomas, as you know, and we worked together on this, and you've been an advisor on it, a very valuable advisor to us on this, is we measure the sense of connection inside an organisation, and we've done enough research now to know that a disconnected workforce is unlikely to perform well. You can perform well in patches when you feel disconnected, because you can be project focused, you can be project outcome focused, so you can go hard at something for 4 weeks. But actually sustaining that long term and getting all of that discretionary value, it has a real bottom line impact. So we've talked about psychological safety as one of the things that a connected workforce probably has implicitly or even explicitly in the way that you do it at Thrive. We've talked about trust as one of those other ingredients. What other elements do you think there are in feeling connected inside an organisation? What other things need to be true? What have you seen in other organisations, or maybe an example from Thrive?
We need to feel valued and that you belong within an organisation. And that's not just like a pat on the back. It's genuinely feeling valued and connected to the mission of the company or to the team that you work in.
Nice. Yeah.
So I think that's an area. And also, I think how people communicate also links to how connected they are, and that might sound a bit strange. So what I mean by that is we have a lot of technology, and often it can be overwhelming because you don't know which platform to use and how to use it. And so that, even though we're more connected than ever, we're actually feeling more disconnected because we don't, it's almost so it's overwhelming, but we also don't know how best to use each tool.
Yeah.
So I think there's something in that around how we communicate, and are we clear about what's expected, and how as an individual I contact my manager and which platform and whatnot. So I think there's a piece around connection there, connection linking with communication.
If I may go back to when you first got assessed when you first got assessed as neurodivergent, it obviously unlocked something in you, right? Maybe, I don't know whether you want to sort of cover some sort of, there was we've spoken about this in the past, but some sort of coming together and aha moments that happened, and I think probably continue to happen, and that's because or whatever. But you've never let it be an excuse for your life. You've let it be an empowerment in some way. Now, it's not the same for everybody, and not everybody can react in the same way. But how do you think your knowledge of your own neurodiversity has impacted the way you set about feeling connected in an organisation? What do you do now that you wouldn't have done if you hadn't known about your drivers and needs and ways of seeing the world?
That's a really good question. I actually think, quite selfishly, because I felt so disconnected in previous places and that I didn't fit ever in friendship circles, in school, in workplaces, that I was so desperate to be understood, actually. And because I was on this journey, and I was like, oh, now I'm starting to understand myself. Like, oh, when I do that, it means this. Or maybe if I tell people that that's what it means, then they'd understand me better. So quite selfishly, when I launched Thrive and I started taking people on, I built this thing called a license to thrive.
Yeah,
and it was for me to be honest, like, how do I communicate when I send you a million typos, because I'm also dyslexic, and my ADHD brain just goes blah. But actually, when I send like a one-word answer or there's loads of typos, it's not because I don't care. It's just that my brain works incredibly fast and I'm usually jumping to something else. Or if I send you an email at 5 a.m, which I know you do too, if I send you an email at 5 a.m, it doesn't mean you have to reply at that time. That's just when I work best, because my brain gets super tired in the afternoon. If I read a message and I don't reply, I don't hate you. Or if I reply K, I don't wish you were dead. It's like, but these are and we laugh, but actually I really upset people because they didn't understand me. And so by doing that myself and being vulnerable, and I don't think I would have done that if I hadn't had the diagnosis, because the diagnosis unlocked my own understanding of myself. And then from there, I was able to articulate things in a way that I hadn't had the words for before, and create a sense of belonging in my own business, but also others followed. And it's interesting because when people join, they don't put very much on their license to thrive, because they're like, oh gosh, this is, because everybody reads everybody's, and they kind of go, this is the first time that I've ever felt heard in an onboarding process. That's the positive side. Nice. But what I notice over time, because we revisit it on a quarterly basis, so that because our preferences change, right? And the way we work, and when you embed into a role, it changes. But what I notice over time is people add more and more and more and more. Nice. And they feel more comfortable in being honest about what they really want and need. Mm-hmm. And that comes over time. But it took me years to get to that point, and I had to really lead by example. But I honestly think if I wasn't neurodivergent, I wouldn't have had that aha moment of, well, no one understands me. So if no one understands me, I probably don't understand them. And then you're always at loggerheads with people, and there's a lot of friction and a lot of tension when there doesn't need to be.
So if you've got, that's a really interesting answer. So you've got this view of how you come across now quite clearly. Yeah. And you have a potential understanding of how you might cause offence now that perhaps wouldn't have been available to you before. Similarly, how the positive way you behave can have a really powerful effect on other people. What did your diagnosis do to help you understand others differently and the way they see it? Because obviously not everybody sees the world like you do. How do you kind of view the interactions with others, not just how you impact those, but how others impact you, and some of the things that perhaps you weren't aware you were missing, or you weren't aware that you had an abundance of, or a slight deficit in, whatever those things. How do you look at others and how they respond?
So I'm actually much more patient and less reactive as a result. my natural reaction was, and to give context, when you ADHD, you struggle with RSD, which is rejection sensitivity. So often some of the conversations would trigger me quite strongly, and I'd take things very, very personally because I didn't understand where they were coming from. So it's given me some perspective of, well, if I might approach this differently, somebody else might. And just taking a step back before I react, before I speak, which is harder than you think when you're ADHD. But actually, it's given me some. I suppose it's pushing me to be more reflective because I'm not a natural reflector, and it's encouraging me to be more patient with others because that's what I would want.
Yeah, nice.
So I think it's that kind of it's cyclical in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. So you introduced the idea of the license to thrive that you'd introduced at your organisation a few years ago. And it informed the way we built our Thomas Connect product because we have psychometrics in it. You know it. You've been very much part of our advisory group helping to create this product. And then we added in this ability to personalize, you know, to be able to add some features like please don't email me out of the blue or call me out of the blue. Please don't expect an answer after 5 p.m. You know, my hobbies at home are these. And people can personalize that section in any which way they want. I've highly personalized mine around, you know, these are my preferred working hours. You know, please contact me in this way. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone. I love receiving a call out of the blue from a colleague, whereas some people I know would absolutely hate that. But that's like, oh, exciting, a call. I'm going to take that. And somebody's clearly wants some help. And that's the kind of, you know, would be a driver of positivity for me. So first of all, thank you for doing that because it certainly made the product solution better. But you know that what the work that we've done in the ability to now measure connection at an organizational, individual and team level, and then do something about it by providing insight is driven by psychometrics. And some people have, oh no, psychometrics, that's all very judgy and it's all very dangerous. It's all like horoscopes and things. And obviously we clearly disagree as an organization, a purveyor of those things. You had a similar view when we first met. You were definitely, I'm not sure about psychometrics. I think they might typecast people. Yeah. 3 years on, 4 years on, what's your view?
I think it's much fairer than I originally thought. I think because I'm neurodivergent and I know that my brain is very different. It's would I be typecast as the difficult one or would I be, or the directness be taken as rudeness, that type thing. But actually having worked with you guys and seeing how you can use that data, which is often the bits that you don't know about yourself consciously, I think it's been really, really helpful from a empowerment perspective. And particularly those people who don't have any self-awareness of how they communicate or what their preferences are, people early in their career, or even later in their career where they've never been asked, you know? But I do think there's a sense of objectivity and fairness, and particularly because you use neurodivergent people within your team. I know that you consider that as part of the outputs. And the outputs are also very positive. So it's not shaming people and saying Jodie is really, really this, so don't do this. It's much more positive. It's, oh, Jodie's really direct. The best way to approach her would be to bullet points or whatever it might be. So I think for me it's a really pragmatic, positive and fair way to approach it, and it helps to give a really fair grounding to have those conversations, as well as like from a manager perspective I find it really helpful. And then also for me training my managers, it's been a really invaluable tool. In fact, it actually came up in our team meeting last week because we were talking about we have a lot of new people who are very young, and we were talking about how can we build psychological safety with them, because it isn't an instant thing. You don't walk into an organisation, even when you're as fantastic as Thrive, you don't walk in and have immediate psychological safety with everybody. You have to build and earn that every single day, and that is built through connecting with them, through understanding them, and through them feeling heard and valued and that they belong. And so we were talking about how how we might be able to approach giving the feedback on the feedback loops, and if people are being, does anyone hesitate, for example, and what might they hesitate on? And we did all of this through a separate feedback loop. So again, it was anonymous, and there was an element of fear around how much narrative they should put or how they should frame it, because they didn't want to upset people. Right. And so it wasn't like necessarily negative about the leadership team. It was that, I suppose they don't know how it's then delivered. Right. So it's like, actually, that's on us to be better at communicating that and being more vulnerable about, we find that conversation difficult, but we'll make sure it's framed in a way that lands as it was intended, because we know that this loop is a positive loop.
Yeah. Yeah, it's brilliant. Totally reinforces, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So we went to a lot of effort to make the content as positive as possible. It still has to be useful, right?
Yeah.
So if it's too positive, then you can't do anything with it.
Yeah.
It has to be fair.
And practical.
And practical. And people want to look at it and go, that is me. Warts and all, I'm happy with that. That describes me. I like the fact that I'm direct or not direct. I like the fact that I like process and structure, or I don't like process and structure. It kind of defines them. But it isn't so simplistic that you just become an archetype. You're one of 5 colours or whatever. It's not as simplistic as that. As useful as they can be, they can oversimplify and over-stereotype people and perhaps not fully reflect the neurodivergent qualities that people have and the needs that come with that.
Yeah. So if you're a leader and you're watching this and you're thinking, oh, my staff are fine, actually, how do you know that, first of all? How do you know they're fine? And secondly, if you do have data that objectively says they are fine, how often have you reviewed that and challenged it and asked for feedback on it? Because often, as I said in the previous question, it's only when you ask further questions and you deepen that curiosity that you find out that even though people have said, I'm fine, that actually they're deep down not. And often in the workplace, so many people, they won't tell you unless you ask in different ways, and you have to find a way to get that information out of them. So that sounds brutal, get that information out of them. But actually, if you're watching this, you know that you need to do something with your team. Whether you think you're saying outwardly, yeah, we're all fine, the reality is most organisations aren't. Nobody's perfect, and there's no silver bullet. It's a constant evolution. So using technology can help us to understand those pulses. Getting a pulse on the culture of your team is so important. And often organisations, they just don't know. They don't have any data. And even the ones that do, they don't use the data very well.
No, I agree with that. And fine isn't good enough either, is it?
No, of course.
Fine is a lose-lose situation. The individual is fine, they're not thriving.
No, and they're therefore probably not being a high performer, or they're not enjoying work, and at any point they're an attrition risk, right? It's like...
Yeah, which is a cost too. You've
sure.
got costs, but you've got the opportunity cost of having someone in role that's not enjoying themselves, which means the business isn't performing as well as it does.
Yeah.
So, thank you for that, Jodie. It was a pleasure talking to you today. Really appreciate it.